Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli out here in the shop. And guess what? I'm getting ready for the tour season. I ordered a bunch of new Abu Garcia Ike series rods. And while everything's all laid out here, I wanted to take this time to explain the different rods in the Abu Garcia Ike series and give you my view on types of rods and action and what they're good for. As I do all this, keep in mind, you don't need to have this many rods and reels. But I wanted to let you know what each of these actions I designed, exactly what its purpose is, and what I use the rod for. In the Abu Garcia Ike series, we break the rods into 3 categories. We have 2 casting models. One's called the Power Series, and one's called the Delay Series. Our Power Series casting rods are graphite rods designed for true power fishing techniques. Our Delay casting rods are rods that are composite. They're graphite and fiberglass mixed together, and they're perfect for delay presentations, especially lures with treble hooks, like crankbaits, topwaters, jerkbaits, things like that. And finally, in the Ike series, we have spinning rods that are called the Finesse series. So let's start right here with the Power Series rod. And again, these Power Series rods are graphite rods, and every one of the Power Series rods you're going to see has a silver label. You're going to see it silver on the wrap. You're going to see it at the bottom. It says Power. It's in silver. It's going to help you identify that it's a graphite Power Series rod. But I want to start with one of the rods in the lineup that's a real important rod for me. It's the 7-foot medium action Power Series rod. 7-foot medium. And if you look at the tip on that medium, it's a rod that has a little bit of tip to it. It's, if you look at the breakdown of that, it's about 70-30. About 30% of it's soft tip, but we have a lot of backbone. I use a 7-foot medium graphite rod for a lot of stuff, but especially, this is the rod if I'm throwing a spinnerbait, a buzzbait, or a vibrating jig, a lure like a chatterbait or a mullex lover. I throw it on the 7-foot medium. Perfect rod for that. It's also a great rod if you throw blade baits, flutter spoons, and fish head spins. Lures where you want just a little bit of soft tip on it. It's a great rod for that. The next one in the lineup is probably the most versatile rod in the whole lineup. It's a 7-foot medium heavy Power Series. So a 7-foot medium heavy graphite. And you can honestly do everything with this rod. We call this an all-purpose rod because if you're a bank fisherman or you only have an opportunity to carry 1 or 2 rods, this is a good one for you to carry. You can throw a jig, a Texas rig worm, a spinnerbait, even a crankbait if you need it to. So it's a 7-foot medium heavy. It's a great all-around rod, and it's a great Texas rig rod if you like to throw the good old standard Texas rig. Let's keep going. And the next one in the lineup is one of my favorites. I got to tell you, I designed this thing for stuff real important to me in my style of fishing. This is the 7.2 medium heavy action rod. 7.2 medium heavy graphite Power Series rod. And this is my jig rod. Oh my gosh, let me tell you, if you're fishing a jig, I don't care if it's a mini flip, a full-size flip out, a football head jig, if you're fishing a swim jig, if you're grinding a wobble head on the bottom, any of those jig category lures, even Magnum shaky heads, things like that, boy, this is the rod. 7.2 medium heavy, and if you look at it, this ratio is about 80-20. About 20% of the rod is tip, and about 80% is backbone. And that lets you jam the hook home on things like jigs. Going to keep going, and if I had to pick the second most versatile rod in this Power Series lineup, it's this one right here. This is a special rod. This is the Abu Garcia 7.4 medium heavy action Ike Power Series rod. 7.4. Here's the interesting thing about this 7.4 rod. I specifically designed this thing for frog fishing, for bigger swim jigs. You know, that was what, when I was designing this rod, it was frogs, bigger swim jigs, some small to moderate sized swim baits. But what happened is this 7.4 became a more versatile rod than that. Now I'm also throwing things like mid to bigger size swim baits. I'm throwing large spinner baits and large buzz baits, oversized swim baits and spinner baits and buzz baits. And it's also doubling a little as a Texas rig rod and a light Carolina rig rod. So besides the 7-foot medium heavy, the 7.4 medium heavy is a great all-around rod. But if you're looking for a frog and a swim jig rod, this is the one for you. Going to keep going. Got 3 left in the Power Series. And this is another rod that always gets work in my boat. Always gets work. It's the 7.6 medium heavy Power Series graphite rod. 7.6 is, to me, a dual purpose rod with a couple other things you can do. For sure, the 7.6 is what I would call a medium to light pitching and flipping rod, right? When you're pitching and flipping a Texas rig and it weighs a quarter or 3/8 or a half ounce or 5/8, right? Lighter than a half ounce. This is the perfect rod. It's a 7.6 medium heavy. It's perfect. It's also the rod I use when I'm throwing a Carolina rig. 3/4 ounce, half ounce Carolina rig weight, bombing it out there, making long casts. In fact, this is the rod I caught a 10-pounder at in the Bassmaster Classic a few years ago. 7.6 medium heavy. You could also do a little bit of swim bait work with this if you're into soft swim baits or hard swim baits. This is another good rod. We're going to keep going, and we've got a new addition to the lineup. This was new in 2018. This is the 710 medium heavy. And this is a real good rod. This is the Power Series. This is a great rod for big baits. We really wanted a rod in the lineup that if you're the kind of guy that throws big lures, I'm talking about big giant swim baits. I'm talking about oversized crankbaits, big top waters. You need something with a lot of butt to it. Alabama rigs, if you throw the A rig, this is the rod for you. It's 710 medium heavy. It's got that same 80-20 mix. Still has a little bit of tip, about 20% tip to help you cast those lures, but it's got a lot of backbone to it. And last but not least, in the Ike Series Power lineup, we have a big stick. And we needed a big stick. And for me, when I'm doing that heavy-duty punching, you know what I'm talking about. You're punching the nasty stuff. Punching mats, grass, heavy timber. And you're fishing a lure that's 3/4 of an ounce or heavier. You're flipping an 1.5 ounce jig. You're flipping a 2-ounce tungsten weight. You need a big stick. And that's our 8-foot heavy action graphite rod. And this is the Power Series rod. If you look at it, this has got a 90-10 ratio on it. About 10% of that rod is tip, because I still like a little tip, even when I'm punching. I don't want a broomstick from the back to the front. I still want a little tip, but 90% of this rod is backbone. So when you hit them with a 2-ounce weight and 65-pound braid, you've got the power to get them out of those mats. That's the Graphite Power Series lineup. Let's move now to the Delay Series. And the Delay Series is our composite rods. Best way I can describe delay is in delay fishing, you want the fish to get the bait totally in his mouth before you start to move that lure forward. And the way you do that is through the material of the rod. Instead of very sensitive, stiff graphite, a composite rod, which is a blend of fiberglass and graphite, gives you, look at it, you can see it just in the rod, gives you that very soft, parabolic rubber banding action. That's going to give you delay to let that fish get it. It's going to give you a little delay in the hook set. And when that fish is jumping and fighting with a treble hook in his mouth, that you want that flex there, okay? So this is Delay Series rods. You're going to know this rod by that green label. And you also see it at the bottom of the rod, it says Delay in green. Easy identifier. We're going to start from our shortest and we're going to work our way up. This is the 6'4" Delay Series rod. This was one of the original launches of the Ike Series rod, and this is really is a specialty rod. If you look at it, 6'4", it's a pretty short rod, but look how small the butt section is. I want you to look at that. The butt section is real small. And this is a rod I designed for twitching and cadence techniques. Jerkbait, top water. When you look at it, you want a small butt because you want to keep it close to your body. And those cadence techniques are all wrist. So you want to get rid of a long butt section. So 6'4", great for smaller jerk baits, smaller top waters, little poppers, little walking baits. It's perfect. The next rod in the lineup is another sort of cool specialty rod in the Delay Series. And again, a composite rod. This is the 6'6" medium heavy Delay Series. This rod was specifically designed for fishing crankbaits up close and personal. You know, there's a lot of times when you're bombing crankbaits a long ways, and you want a longer rod for that. But when you're fishing a square bill, when you're fishing a shallow diving crankbait, and you're right next to the docks, you're right next to the standing timber, you're doing short little roll cast around riprap, you want this shorter rod. Perfect square bill rod for all my square bill guys watching right now. 6'6" medium heavy, very parabolic action. It's a Delay Series. It's almost a 50-50 rod, right? Keep going, and this was a new addition in 2008 to the Ike Series. This is the 6'8" Delay Series with a moderate action, a medium action. I want to show you something. The 6'4" and the 6'8", look at the butts on them. Exactly the same butt length. The only difference in the 6'8" is 4 more inches on the tip. So this 6'8" Parabolic Delay Rod is perfectly designed, again, for twitching and cadence techniques. A little bit bigger jerk baits, larger top waters, larger walking baits, prop baits, 6'8". This has really become a staple for me when you want to cadence with something, but you want a little bit longer rod. 6'8". Keep going, and just like in the Power Series, the Delay Series has a workhorse, and this is the best all-around rod in this Delay Series, and it's a 7-foot medium action. You know, I really designed this rod to do everything. If you had to, you could throw a jerkbait or a topwater, but for all-around crankbait fishing, from a shallow diver to a deep diver, but especially moderate diving crankbaits, a DT6, a DT10, this is the rod. It's got that 50-50 parabolic action. Look at it, about half of it. Look, I'm gonna watch this. Watch when I do this. Look at that. Very whippy, very parabolic, perfect all-around rod in this Delay Series. Going to keep going. We have the 7'3" medium action Abu Garcia Ike Series Delay Rod. The 7'3" I designed as a crankbait rod for a little bit larger crankbaits. So now you're throwing medium to deep divers, a DT10, a DT14, a DT16, Strike King Series 5, Strike King Series 3, lures that are medium to large. This is a great rod. 7'3", medium action, parabolic. Once again, it's Delay Series. Perfect for crankbaits. This is a great rod. I use this almost every tournament for those medium to deep diving crankbaits. Next one is a really, really cool rod. And this we added to the lineup in 2018. This is the 7.6 medium action delay series rod. And this is going to become a real versatile rod for you if you want to do a little bit of everything. But I designed the 7.6 medium action delay as a lipless vibration rod. I'm talking about rip and wraps, rattle traps, spots, one knockers. I throw that thing a lot. I love a lipless. And this 7.6 has the right length and action to help snap that bait out of the grass. If you look at this one, it's got a little more butt on it. So instead of being 50-50, this one's about 60-40. About 40% of it's real tippy, but about 60% of it is backbone. And for fishing a lipless bait, when you're ripping it out of grass, this is a great rod. If you're fishing a crankbait in heavy grass, outside edge of grass, ripping it out of milfoil or hydrilla, this is a great rod because it's got just a little extra backbone to snatch that crankbait. And then last but not least, in the delay series, and this is a parabolic rod just like all the rest, this is the 710 medium heavy delay rod. And we needed a big parabolic rod for giant crankbaits. Now I'm talking about a DT16, a DT20. I'm talking about a 6XD, an 8XD, those bigger crankbaits, a hot lips, big bomber, fat-free shads. This is the right rod for you. It's 710, so it's extra long, and it's medium heavy. It's got a little bit more backbone. It's like that grass rod. It's got a 60-40 bend, but that soft tip with a big crankbait, you're going to be able to load it up, and as you load that rod, that tip's like a rubber band, and when you cast, boing, you're going to get a lot of extra distance. Remember, the longer the rod, the longer the cast. That's the 710 medium heavy delay rod. You know, I saved my spinning rods for last because a lot of people don't like spinning. But finesse fishing, spinning rod, light line, is just as important as any of the casting rods in my lineup. And, you know, these are really actions that I use day in and day out for finesse techniques. When the fishing's tough, light line, smaller lures, these Ike Series spinning rods are the deal. And we call these the finesse rods. And on this one, the label is going to be purple. You're going to see the purple label. And on the very bottom of the rod, you're going to see in purple, you're going to see a word that says finesse. And I want to go over these series of rods with you. First one is a really cool rod, and it's a 6.6 medium heavy spinning rod. A 6.6 medium heavy spinning rod. And this I designed as a jig head rod. Jig head. I'm talking about tube jigs, grubs, anything where you're using a jig head, but especially, listen to me on this one, especially shaky head fishing. Two theories on this shorter 6.6 medium heavy rod. You know, the one is when I'm fishing a jig head, shaky head, a grub, a tube, I want to force myself to slow down. And the shorter the rod, the less line you pick up as you work it, okay? So 6.6 rod's going to slow me down. The other thing that I like about this 6.6 is it's a shorter rod, and when I'm skipping, when I'm using that skipping technique, it lets me do that little check swing cast when you're skipping, right? There's that dock you're trying to go under. You just want those short little, almost like a check swing. And a really long rod inhibits the ability to make that little cast. So 6.6 jig head rod, great for shaky heads. Next one in the lineup, man, this has been a staple from the very beginning in the Ike Series finesse rods. This is the 610 medium light. 610 medium light. And I really want to show you. This thing, by the way, happens to be the lightest rod in our lineup. Really sweet little medium light action rod, but look at the tip on that. It's beautiful. Look at that. It's about a 60-40, about 40% of that rod's tip. And remember, everything in the Finesse series, we're back to graphite now, but it's a medium light action. And I designed this 610 specifically for light drop shot fishing your drop shot rigs. I designed it for light wacky rigs and light Ned rigs. You know, on those techniques where you're really having to finesse and you're never jacking them. You know, when you set the hook on a light drop shot or a light wacky or a light Ned, dude, you're not jacking them. You're just reeling into them. And that medium light absorbs that bite and keeps them pegged. This is a great drop shot rod if you're in those smaller weight categories. A quarter, 3/16, an eighth, a 16th, perfect rod for you, the 610 medium light. Here it goes. We've got another one that I call a workhorse or an all-around rod. And this is it. This is a 7-foot medium action Finesse series spinning rod, Abu Garcia Ike rod. The 7-foot medium does it all. If you watched Fish My City recently, you saw me use this rod for almost every technique. Freshwater, saltwater, bass, multi-species, because it can do everything. It really can. It's a 7-foot, it's a medium action. It's got about a 70-30. About 30% of the tip is soft, and about 70% of the rod is backbone. And I can do absolutely everything you can imagine when it comes to finesse fishing. A little bit smaller bait, lighter weight, I can do it with this. The 7-foot medium action, that's our all-around workhorse. Going to keep going, and boy, this is a really key rod for me. This is a 7.2 medium. A 7.2 medium in the Ike Series Finesse rod. And this rod for me, I had a lot of things in mind when I designed this rod. But one of the techniques that I really had in mind was finesse swim baiting. Man, you can call them grubs, but a finesse swim bait has really become a staple. I can't remember the last time I went fishing, especially in a tournament, where I didn't have some sort of finesse swim bait tied on. And this is the perfect rod for it. It's a 7.2 medium. It's got a little bit of tip to cast an 1/8 ounce or a 3/16 ounce jig head with just a little Berkeley swim bait or grub on there, cast it a mile. The 7.2 you could also use for a lot of other stuff. If you throw soft stick baits, Senko style lures, like the Berkeley Power Bait General, it's a real good rod. If you throw small minnow style baits, flukes and stuff like that, it's a good all around rod. But for sure, this is my jig head swim bait rod. It's a 7.2. Going to keep going to a new addition in 2018, and it's really starting to become one of my favorites in this lineup. And when I was designing this one, I thought about the 610 medium light, but I said, you know what? I want a rod that's longer. I need a longer rod. I need something that fishes like the 610 but longer. And this is the 7.4 medium light. 7 feet 4 inches medium light rod, Abu Garcia Finesse rod. And we're back, look at that, I want to show you, we're back to that 60-40. 40% of this rod is real tippy, real soft, but we still have 60% backbone. And the 7.4 medium light finesse rod has become my rod when I'm throwing bigger drop shots. When I'm throwing a drop shot and it's got a quarter or heavier, it's got a 3/8 weight on it, it's got a 5/16 weight on it. I love this rod. Bigger wacky rigs. When I'm throwing a wacky rig with a 1/4 ounce jig head, or I'm throwing a Nico rig with a little bit heavier nail weight in the back, this is a great rod. It's also, you know, you're going to be hearing a lot about a Tokyo rig, and there's a finesse Tokyo rig, and I love throwing it on that as well. The 7.4 medium light. And one last thing I want to throw out there to you. If you like throwing small, really small jerk baits or shad wraps, crankbaits that are too light to throw on a casting rod, dude, Look at that. I'm telling you, you load it up. It's almost like throwing a crankbait rod, and it's for spinning techniques. So 7.4 medium light. I'm in love with that rod. 2 left. We're going to, these next 2 are standouts, because if you look at spinning rods offered by every company out there, it's hard to find a long spinning rod. And we designed this one. This is called the 7.6 medium heavy long cast rod. We call it a long cast. And the reason we call it a long cast is, get back to that theory. The longer the rod, the longer the cast. And the 7.6 medium heavy long cast finesse rod is perfect for techniques where you have to cast that little bait a really far way away. I love this thing when I'm throwing hair jigs. I'm fishing marabou hair, synthetic, any kind of hair where you really have to make a long cast. I love this thing. This thing for fluke fishing, soft plastic jerk baits, and soft stick baits like the General or the Senko. This is a great rod, because in clear water, you got to bomb it. And this is the perfect combination. It's a medium heavy, so we're back to that 70-30, 30% tip, 70% backbone. Here's my sleeper thing for this and the next one. I'm going to tell it to you right now. If you're a bank fisherman or a kayak or canoe fisherman and you're lower to the water, right? In a kayak, you're low to the water. This longer rod gives you more leverage. The 7.6 medium heavy is my standard rod that I use when I'm fishing in my Hobie kayak, using a lot of different finesse techniques. You know, last but not least, expanding on what we just talked about, I wanted one more rod that was even longer than the 7.6. And we came out with the 7.8 medium action Abu Garcia finesse rod. So the 7.8 is neat because it's a hair lighter than the 7.6, okay? It's back to that 60-40, little softer tip. But you got 7 feet, 8 inches to bomb, I mean bomb a lure. It's great for all those things I just mentioned, flukes, soft jerk baits, light Carolina rig. This thing is, some people call it mojo rigging, some people call it split shotting. This thing is great for that. It's another one of those rods when you want to make a longer cast, but you want a medium action instead of a medium heavy. Man, this is the rod for you. You kayak guys, bank fishing guys, perfect rod for you. Listen to me. I want to reiterate. You absolutely do not need to get all these rods. You don't need all these rods. But think about the technique and the action when selecting a rod. If you're an Abu Garcia Ike Series fan, take a look at it. If you're missing something in your lineup, think about it. Power Series, Graphite for jigs, spinner baits, those power fishing techniques. Delay Series rods, Parabolic rods for treble hook lures, jerk baits, crank baits, topwaters. Last but not least, finesse rods for baits that weigh 1/4 ounce or less, small little finesse lures. Think about your spinning rod techniques. I hope you learned something today. I hope you try out the Abu Garcia Ike Series. Good luck and good fishing from the shop.